Before Ann Wilson became a voice that could shake arenas, she was something far quieter. A shy girl in a moving family. A child who learned early that stability was not a place, but something you built inside yourself. Born in 1950, she grew up in a home where discipline and art existed side by side. Her father's military career meant suitcases were never fully unpacked and goodbyes were never dramatic, just routine. Her mother, a trained pianist, filled the house with music, not as ambition, but as habit. It was simply there, like furniture, like air. Anne did not rush toward it. She was not the confident child who sang in front of mirrors. She was reserved, self-conscious. She carried extra weight and a stutter that made speaking feel like a test she could fail at any moment. School was not a stage, it was an obstacle course. Attention was something to avoid, not seek. But life has a strange way of choosing its instruments. When illness forced her to stay home for months, the world grew smaller. And in that smaller world, a guitar appeared. Not as a promise, not as a dream, just as something to do while waiting to recover. She did not know it then, but this was the moment her life quietly changed direction. She began to sing not to impress, but to survive. And in singing, something loosened. The stutter softened. The fear retreated. For the first time, her voice did not feel like a liability. It felt like a shelter. She wasn't becoming a star yet. She was becoming herself. Recovery did not send Ann Wilson back to the same life. Something in her had shifted. The girl who once tried to disappear into the background had discovered a place where she could exist without apology. She began to sing at school, not loudly, not with bravado, but with a focus that surprised even her. Each performance was less about being seen and more about proving to herself that her voice would not abandon her. By the time she reached her late teens, there was no real alternative anymore. Music was no longer a hobby, it was a direction. After finishing high school in the late 60s, she stepped into the uncertain world of local bands, small stages, and borrowed equipment. Her first serious group did not make her famous. It barely made her money, but it gave her something more important: discipline. Night after night, she learned how to hold a room, how to listen to the space between notes, how to command attention without demanding it. These were years of garages and cramped rehearsal rooms, of long drives for short shows, of microphones that failed and audiences that barely noticed. But in those places, her voice began to grow into something larger than her doubts. It gained weight, control, presence. She was not chasing stardom yet. She was chasing precision, learning how to turn feeling into sound, learning how to make a song stand upright. What she didn't know was that somewhere ahead, a door was already open, and behind it was the band that would give her voice a name. Opportunity did not arrive with ceremony. It came disguised as a simple audition, a struggling group looking for a singer, a newspaper ad that could have easily been ignored. But when Anne stepped into that room in the early 70s, something in the air shifted. The musicians she met were still searching for a sound, for an identity, for a reason to believe they were more than just another bar band. Her voice gave them that reason. With her arrival, the group began to change shape. Even the name was not settled yet, as if the band itself needed time to understand what it was becoming. But direction is a powerful thing, and Anne brought not only a voice, but a gravity. Songs started to lean toward her. Arrangements began to leave space for her. Slowly, the band that would become Heart started to reveal itself. Then came a decision that was as emotional as it was strategic, a move away from home, across the border, toward a scene that felt less crowded, less hostile to newcomers. Canada offered patience, and for Anne it offered something else too: love, a relationship that tied her personal life to the band's future in ways no one could fully predict. Not long after, her younger sister Nancy joined. The center of the band locked into place. Two sisters, different energies, one foundation. From that point on, Heart was no longer just a project. It was a commitment, a shared risk. They worked like people who knew they were running out of time, writing, rewriting, shaping something they could finally believe in. They did not yet know how far it would travel. The debut album did not announce itself quietly. When it finally arrived in the mid-70s, it felt less like a release and more like a revelation. The songs carried contrasts that mirrored Anne herself: softness and force, intimacy and command. One moment she sounded like she was whispering secrets, the next like she was tearing open the sky. The record gave Heart a face, and it gave Anne a role she could no longer avoid. leader. Success came faster than she had imagined and heavier than she expected. The charts climbed, the crowds grew, and with every new stage, the responsibility expanded. On stage, she was unwavering, a fixed point in the light. Offstage, she became the quiet center of the group, the one who smoothed arguments, who absorbed doubt, who kept the machine moving. But the outside world was not gentle. Comparisons followed them everywhere, some flattering, some dismissive. Radio stations hesitated, critics sharpened their knives. For Anne, it was confusing. She was not trying to imitate anything. She was trying to tell the truth in her own voice. Yet suddenly that truth had to defend itself. Touring turned days into corridors and cities into a blur. Sleep became optional. Pressure became constant. The band was rising, but the ground beneath them felt thinner every week. Anne had wanted this life. She had worked for it. But now she was learning the first rule of success. It never arrives alone. The next phase did not begin with confidence. It began with tension. The band was bigger now, and so were the expectations. Every album had to justify the last. Every song had to prove something. For Anne, the pressure found a new outlet: anger. Not the loud kind, the focused kind, the kind that sharpens instead of explodes. One song, born from humiliation and misunderstanding, became a line in the sand. It was fast, unforgiving, driven by a voice that refused to be reduced to rumor or spectacle. In the studio, she pushed herself past caution, past comfort. Engineers watched their meters. She watched the walls. It was not just a performance, it was a declaration. But while the outside world began to harden, its private structure began to weaken. Romantic ties inside the group tangled with creative disagreements. What once felt like a family started to feel like a negotiation. Anne and Nancy wanted depth, space, evolution. Others wanted volume and tradition. No one was wrong, but no one was aligned. Out of this came music that was more thoughtful, more restrained, more reflective. You could hear Anne changing, reading more, turning inward, looking for balance where chaos had been. She was growing, and growth in a band is never silent. By the early 80s, the structure that had once held everything together finally gave way. Relationships ended, one departure led to another, and suddenly the band Anne had been holding upright felt like a house missing its central beams. She tried to carry it anyway. You can hear it in the records from that time, her voice standing in the front like a last pillar, wide and determined, holding songs together through sheer force of will. But effort does not always equal direction. The audience was changing, radio was changing, the industry was changing, and heart, for a moment, seemed to be standing still. Albums came and went without the impact they once had. For the first time since the beginning, Anne had to face the possibility that honesty alone might not be enough. Then came the offer to transform. New producers, new sound, a new image. It felt like a negotiation with fate. Part of her resisted, part of her understood. Survival in music often requires compromise. She worked like someone training for a different body, every note measured, every climb calculated. When the comeback arrived in the mid-80s, it was not subtle. The songs were bigger, the choruses higher, and her voice, now disciplined like steel, carried the entire weight of the new heart. The success was enormous. So was the cost. From the outside, it looked like triumph without shadow. The band was everywhere, the songs were unavoidable, the stages grew larger, and so did the crowds. Anne's voice became a kind of monument, immense, controlled, unmistakable. Night after night, she delivered performances that felt almost superhuman. But the body remembers what the applause cannot fix. The new era demanded not only perfect sound, but perfect image. Cameras were less kind than audiences. Stylists, directors, executives, everyone seemed to have an opinion about how she should be seen. And slowly, the old wounds returned. The childhood shame, the feeling of being evaluated before being heard. On set, she stood in the light. In private, she carried the weight of it alone. Anxiety found its way backstage. Sometimes it waited until the final minutes before a show. She learned to sit with it, to breathe through it, to walk on stage anyway and sing as if nothing inside her was shaking. The schedule never softened. Albums, tours, videos, years passed like this. The machine kept moving, but inside it, exhaustion was building. By the time the 90s arrived, something had to give. Even the strongest voice needs silence to remember why it sings. Stepping away did not feel like retreat.
It felt like oxygen. For the first time in decades, Anne found herself outside the machinery that had defined her adult life. Smaller rooms replaced arenas. Songs became conversations again, instead of declarations. With her sister, she explored music that did not need to conquer anything. It only needed to exist. In time, she began to stand alone as well. Solo work, collaborations, tributes. Her voice, now deeper and more weathered, carried something it hadn't before: perspective. She was no longer trying to prove how high she could climb. She was showing how much truth could live inside a single note. Eventually, Hart returned, not as a resurrection driven by urgency, but as a reunion guided by choice. The music that followed sounded like a circle closing: less polish, more wood and air, more space for stories. Along the way, her life changed in quieter but deeper ways. Motherhood arrived late and reshaped her sense of time. She made peace with her body not as an image, but as an instrument that had carried her across a lifetime. Conflicts would come again, and healing would follow again, because that is the rhythm of long journeys. Anne Wilson was never just a voice built for power. She was a voice built for endurance, for survival, for return. And that may be the rarest kind of strength, not to burn forever, but to keep finding new ways to keep the fire alive.